Okay, next I'm going to talk about my compressor, which right here I'm just using Vintage Warmer with the fat and the multi on, and all I've done is lower the speed a little bit. Actually, you usually like to keep it pretty high, pretty slow, but for this song I liked it around 74, and then I raised it just a couple dB of drive, not a whole lot, because on your master you want to be more gentle if anything. But a lot of people like to use, let's see here, what do I have set up? An RMS compressor is very popular for the master. The RMS setting on any compressor is an average setting. So it's more slow. A lot of people call it more musical. It's really good for your master because that's what you want. RMS tends to glue things together, bring things together, make them all feel like they were recorded together, like they fit together like a puzzle piece. So I'll show you my song with this compressor turned on. And I'll show you what the You can tell they sound different, but they both sound good. And I have nothing against this compressor. I usually like to use Vintage Warmer, but that's totally just a personal call. This sounds good too. There's nothing wrong with it. If you have tons of peaks, a lot of like short clipping parts in your songs, you might want to use the peak setting. And generally speaking, when you're using a compressor like this, you want it to be about -2 to 3 dB of gain reduction right here. And then attack and release can really be anywhere that sounds good to you, but generally speaking, you want it to be more slow than fast because you don't want to be crushing your song on the master. You more want to be doing that in your mix with all your individual tracks. But like I said, everyone does it differently, and there are tons of artists who do crush the master, and that's how they get their particular sound. I just like to go for a more clean, natural sound, a more traditional, I guess, radio-friendly sound. Let's see, so you can see right here, my gain reduction is just hitting just barely, really on the peaks. Like when the kick hits and other things are hitting with the kick, that's when it's getting reduced. And I have it at a very mellow setting here at around 8 milliseconds for the attack and 142 for the release. It's pretty mellow, but normal. So next I want to talk about the limiter, which is where you're going to be getting a bulk of your volume. So on this particular limiter, I'm using the ozone limiter, which I love. It's my favorite one. I have the ozone turned up to decibels on the input and down 4 here on the limiter. Now the reason why I've done that is because I know ozone in particular, I learned this watching a different video, ozone in particular likes your signal to be hot, for it to come in loud. It sounds better. It sounds better than leaving this at 0 and then pulling this down to -6, which would be theoretically the same volume. That's just something I know about this particular limiter, that it's not true of all software limiters or all limiters in general, but this one, I know that for a fact. I have it here in the fast and loud setting, around 3. Sometimes I like to take it a little lower, sometimes a little higher, depending on the song. And I have it on Intelligent 2, because Intelligent 2 is designed for beat-oriented songs like hip-hop and electro and dance music. And Intelligent 1 is more designed for, I guess, softer, more radio-friendly music. Intelligent 2 is, if you're using any song that's beat or drum-oriented, Intelligent 2 is better than Intelligent 1, in my experience. The margin is something that's debatable. A lot of people just crush it at 0.0, and a lot of people like to take it down to like -0.3, because if you're using a cheap system, CD player, even if you are not going above 0.0, sometimes it can still clip or distort. So sometimes people like to leave themselves a little bit, a tiny bit of headroom with the margin this way. I just leave myself barely any headroom by doing -0.1, which is also pretty common. Some people like to keep it at 0.0, like I said, and like all the way to the top, because most modern systems can handle it no problem. It's really up to you. Another limiter that people like to use a lot is L2, which is great if you don't know what the hell you're doing. That's off. Because L2 is simple as hell. All you have to do is turn on the threshold and it sounds great. But a lot of people hate it, a lot of people love it. It's one of the more common master limiters. I'll show you the difference right here. I'll turn on my old limiter. To my ears, L2 sounds fuller and warmer, and this one sounds louder and more present, I think. L2 also really helps your bass. I think it sounds great with the kick. It's up to you. It's a personal choice. The Ableton limiter sounds great. Almost all the limiters built into all DAWs sound really great. It's just something you need to play around with and find what works for you. There is no right answer, period. And the last thing I want to talk about is mixing into plugins. Like right here I have these two plugins, the two saturators. One is the built-in saturator from Ableton, and the other one is the Pt.2, which is a wonderful plugin. A lot of people, including professional studios, like to throw in plugins that warm up your sound before they even start their song, before they record a single note, and they do what's called quote-unquote mixing into the plugin. So for example, the saturator will compress your song a tiny bit. It'll add a lot of harmonics and warmth to your song. You don't want to go overboard with it, so I just turn up the drive to 2, the output to -2, so it stays even with the volume. And I'll play it for you like this. So you can hear that it adds a little bit of fullness, a little bit of warmth to the sound. Sometimes it can be too much, sometimes it can be exactly what you need. They call it mixing in because if you do this before you start anything, you automatically compensate for the extra fullness, the extra loudness that you get from using the saturator in your mix. So if I were to put this on before I even started the song, my kick might be 1 or 2 decibels lower because I know the saturator is going to raise it up. I'll just hear that, automatically do it. And if you do this, a lot of times you'll find that if you mix into a saturator type plugin, and then at the very end of your song, if you turn it off, your song will sound totally different. And you will almost like have to use it it'll be mandatory for your song to sound good if you do it that way, which is cool, you know, because you can have a unique sounding, warm sounding song that way. Or you can add it later in the mix if it's what sounds good to you, but I think it's probably more common to mix into these type of plugins. TwinTube is a good alternative to PSP Vintage Warmer, I find. If you don't have this, TwinTube is good because you can add the harmonics above 2,000, 3,000, 6,000, or 10,000. I'll add that high end that I like to get from the PSP Vintage Warmer's EQ. And you can also add saturation from plugin like Ableton Live Saturator, which is a great plugin in itself. So a lot of people like that. A lot of people also use Tapehead by Macy to mix into. I know a lot of professional studios even add that on their master before they even start mixing. It's a great plugin. It's only available for Pro Tools though, but it's only like $70. I highly recommend buying that if you use Pro Tools at all. Great plugin. And I guess the last thing I'll talk about is things like stereo imaging. I usually like to do this in the mix, but Ozone's is pretty good. You just have to make sure you don't go overboard with it because it starts to make your sound, I think, thin and weird sounding. But it sounds pretty good on its own. I only use it on some tracks, not on all. And I do it at very low amounts. You can see the bass is being lowered -0.2, the mids and highs 0.1, but you can hear a difference with and without it. So on this particular song, I thought it sounded pretty good on very low, very mellow settings. I do not like to go overboard with this. You should be doing that in your mix, I think. That's my personal philosophy. And I'm not going to talk about master reverb, exciters, or multi-band compressors because I don't use them. I don't like them. It's not that I disapprove of them. I think it's great if you like to use those things. I just have nothing to say on them because it's just not my personal taste. Alright guys, I guess that's it. I can't really think of anything else. I probably missed something. If you have any questions, just post them in the comments, or maybe I'll just make another video when I have free time. Hope you guys learned something, and share with me any information that you guys have, because I know at least I'm always learning. Alright, take it easy.